Hello and welcome to this episode of the Gladiator Podcast, your place for Gladiator news and content. I'm Joker Buddy, and here with me today is...
UFO.
I'm Seismic Lawns.
And this is Blightning.
And UFO, how about you tell us what we're here for today?
Of course, today's topic is budget decks, specifically decks you can make without spending a single wild card on Arena. We're going to be using the new player experience and the cards within, plus 2 extra cards you can get from codes, to build decks that can be played and competitive in Gladiator without having to spend a single wild card or anything that isn't given to you already just by having an Arena account. Within these restrictions, everyone has chosen a 2-color pair to build a deck around, and taken a little bit of time to really refine and figure out what the actual strategy for those colors are going to be.
These decks won't include any cards that you have to craft in order to receive on Arena. So all of these cards will be available after your first 15 or so days of playing if you go through the entire new player experience. These cards include some real hitters, like Elder Gargaroth, a 5-mana 6/6 with Vigilance, Reach, Trample, and whenever it attacks or blocks, you choose one to create a 3/3 green beast token, gain 3 life, or draw a card. And also, a lot of cards in these decks are commons and uncommons that still pull their weight. And also really interesting cards that you might not play in other decks, like Zephyr Goal, a single blue for a 1/1 creature that has flying and no other text.
A couple things to note. Firstly, as Seismic pointed out, there are some good cards in here, but there are also cards like Zephyr Gull, which are, while not the worst thing you can be doing, not exactly top tier cards. I feel confident in saying that these decks are playable in the Gladiator Discord looking for games queue or to bring to a weekly and win a few games, but they're not exactly breaking the meta. Secondly, the new player experience cards have changed a couple times due to rotations or bannings in Standard, and it is possible that the card pool for free-to-play players may have changed by the time you see this.
Thank you, Blightning. Now let's go ahead and talk about our decks a bit. For my color pair, I chose Orzhov. Looking through the Orzhov cards, it was sort of interesting. Unlike some of the other colors, there's a lot of cards that you'd honestly already see in Gladiator. A lot of the best black removal is already part of the new player experience. Heartless Act, Erebos' Intervention, Eliminate, and while it's starting to see less play, E2 Extinction is still a very good Magic card. And all those sort of let me build an Orzhov mid-range deck with a bit of life gain sub-theme, with cards like Hollowed Priest. It's just 2 mana for a 1/1 that says whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's just another Ajani's Primate. A little smaller base body, but it's still very good in this deck. With all this life gain, I've had it become a very, very sizable creature. And as we mentioned before, one of the best removal spells in this format is Heartless Act. Once you gain a little bit of life, it can't be killed by that. It's just a very problematic threat to have to deal with.
Continuing that thought of new player experience cards, Joker, you were talking about Savage Gorger before this and just how much it had impressed you in the list you chose.
Yeah, so for some context, Savage Gorger is a 3-mana 1/1 with flying, and it says at the beginning of your end step, if an opponent lost life this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, which this card isn't very exciting, I'm going to be honest, it's a common. It's a very weak base body, which means that it'll die to removal a fair amount, but it's a very powerful effect. After 2 turns, this just becomes a very scary clock. I've gotten to put a counter on it the first time and then get to attack with it the second time, and then at that point it's a 3/3 flyer. That's already great, and then it just keeps going. I've had this be like a 3-turn clock on its own. I got to slap a Shadow Spear on this. Shadow Spear being a recent equipment added in Theros Beyond Death. It's 1 mana, and it says equipped creature gets +1/+1 trample and lifelink. Equips for 2 mana, and then it also has this extra ability that says pay 1 mana, permanents your opponents control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. This gives your Savage Gorger lifelink and trample, and if you thought a flyer was already going to be a problem, what if it also had trample and lifelink? So when they're trying to chump block your flyer that gets bigger every turn, it just gets to go over them and then gain you back that life, which makes racing it even more impossible than it already was before.
It's like a build your own Baneslayer Angel.
And Baneslayer's in here too, thanks for mentioning, because that card is also part of the new player decks. Baneslayer is a 5-mana 5/5 with flying and lifelink and protection from demons and from dragons, which comes up a surprising amount. Turns out that Glorybringer is a card that people like playing, And then there's also just a few choice demons that pop up, not to mention if people are running that enchantment Demonic Embrace, which mind you I'm playing as well, which most importantly gives +3/+1 and makes the creature a demon, which, comes up sometimes. Baneslayer is a pretty good blocker every once in a while. Won me a few games.
On the note of Baneslayer Angel, that card is popping up in a lot of white-based control and mid-range decks as a way to end games, in some cases almost out of nowhere with only a turn or two's notice. And it's being played in top-level competitive decks, and you get it for free.
Indeed you do. And I imagine that Baneslayer also pulls even double duty in a list like this, where you also have all these life gain sort of sub-themes from both white and black in the new player experience.
Yeah, a lot of the cards that show up in the Orzhov free-to-play deck are life gain decks, because that was the theme for M21. So a lot of the cards that we see in it are cards like Veto, which is just an insane card that says, whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So it turns all your lifelink into extra damage, essentially giving your Baneslayer, which is already a card that people are scared of, what if you just gave it double strike? What if it just hit them, and then, hell, even if it gets blocked, they just take 5? Because Baneslayer gains you 5 life, and Veto says that they lose that much life. Then this also synergizes with other cards in the deck. Like, one of the cards that's being played is Impassioned Orator, which is just, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. So, turning these life gain triggers into damage triggers allows you to take your strategy, which helps you make the game go longer because it's gaining you life. It turns that into damage, which means that these actions, which can sometimes be seen as a slower, sort of grindier game, means that it's now killing them. And it's killing them fast, because you're making tokens with cards like Leon War Leader, another free-to-play card, which is, whenever it attacks, makes 2 1/1 white cat creature tokens with lifelink that are tapped and attacking. You basically just gave those cats triple strike, because when they entered the battlefield, they gained you life, which dealt a damage thanks to Veto, and then they hit, which deals a damage to them, and then they had a lifelink, so you get even more damage. And it's just, it causes this sort of tumbling value engine, which allows you to win a lot more games than you'd expect to.
Yeah, and there are also some resources that you didn't even realize gave you life gain, like standout card in this set, Clackbridge Troll.
Big clackers. A 5-mana 8/8 with trample and haste. Because, it's 2020, that's the joke that people made, right? Well, let's just go even further. It also says when it enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 3 0/1 white goat tokens. At the beginning of combat in your turn, any opponent may sacrifice a creature. If that player does, tap Clackbridge Troll and you gain 3 life and draw a card. So this is just a 5-mana 8/8 that gains you further advantage. And then again, if Veto's out, that means that they are choosing between taking 8 or taking 3, and they can't block that 3. They still probably can't block that 8 because it has trample. Why does this card exist as an 8/8 with trample for 5? I don't know why. I don't know why I looked over this card before, but it just kills people.
And Clackbridge Troll recently have been seeing some amount of play in blue-black control decks in weekly tournaments, right, UFO?
Yeah, definitely. We've seen an increase in Clackbridge Troll in these decks, especially in decks that don't usually have access to creatures like that. Like you said, specifically blue-black, but also just mono-black has been using Clackbridge Troll to great effect recently. And the value it gains is just pretty continuous, because even once the goats are gone, your opponent can still just kind of worriedly throw their creatures at you for additional draw while hoping to keep this giant threat at bay while they try to find some sort of removal for it. Especially because everyone right now is really highly valuing red base removal because it comes down earlier and kills things from the early aggressive decks. Hard removal has kind of, it's not gone, but it's a little bit less. And Clackbridge Troll likes to prey on that, so to speak.
I can confirm that as a blue-red control player, this card is absolutely terrifying if I tap out and let it resolve.
And let me tell you, if you thought you could burn out an 8/8, no you can't. It's going to take usually about 3 removal spells to beat, and that's good value for them.
Or 1 Perverosis Intervention. Play that card more.
True, but still, That's just more to say about Clackbridge Troll's strengths, that it requires a very specific answer in what cards that people are currently playing.
Speaking of Clackbridge Troll's strengths, I think it also shines in that Golgari deck you built, Seismic.
It absolutely does. It's featured in the Golgari free-to-play list, and it does a slightly different job in this list because this Golgari deck cares a lot less about gaining life and more about having giant creatures at the end of the game, which Clackbridge Troll does almost the best out of any of the cards in the deck as the only consistent 8/8 in the deck.
So, how are you actually getting to these big creatures?
Well, we have a few ways to increase our mana production, including a new player experience exclusive card, Woodland Mystic, which is 1 and a green for a 1/1 elf that taps for a green and has no other text. But it turns out that text is more than enough, and this card has been seeing play in actual competitively viable decks for quite a while. It also utilizes removal spells like Eliminate and Heartless Act. Also, one of the best black removal spells I think we have in the format, Erebos' Intervention, which is X and a black for an instant where you choose one. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn and you gain X life, or exile up to twice X cards from graveyards.
So what are some standout green cards in this list? I know that we've talked a lot about black and we've talked about a mana dork, but what are some green cards that have been putting in a lot of work that you haven't noticed otherwise?
Well, there is the elephant in the room, or rather the beast in the room, of Elder Gargaroth being the quintessential free green card. But there's also some really interesting cards that I wouldn't be playing otherwise, like Affectionate Indrik, which is 5 and a green for a beast. It's a 4/4, and when it enters the battlefield, you may have it fight target creature that you don't control.
I do want to point out that there is.
What about the actual elephant?
Damn it.
What about the actual elephant in the room in that Thorn Mammoth you got?
Thorn Mammoth is also incredible.
We were all hopping on the elephant bit.
I'm glad we all got there.
Yeah, moving on from the proverbial elephant in the room to the literal elephant in the room, Thorn Mammoth is 7 mana for a 6/6. It has trample, and whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield, Thorn Mammoth fights something. The card does major work. It can, with a decent hand, turn your opponent's board state from everything into a few piles of medium creatures that you didn't want to fight with Thorn Mammoth because you already could kill 4 creatures.
Let me tell you, this one makes Clackbridge Troll not as good.
I honestly disagree. I think Thorn Mammoth makes Clackbridge Troll even better because Thorn Mammoth...
Oh no! My opponent's Thorn Mammoth, my Clackbridge Troll.
I mean, you still have the bigger creature.
It doesn't kill the Clackbridge Troll, but it sure does kill the rest of your board.
True. But no, it just seems like there's a lot of focus on these sort of 2-for-1 effects in your top end, where you've got Clackbridge Troll that draws cards, or Thorn Mammoth that fights things, or Kogla, best fight thing we've got, and then Affectionate Indrik, which is much worse than Kogla, but still seemingly good enough to get into the deck because it can kill a thing.
It absolutely does, and it does its job pretty well. I've had more than my fair share of times where I've played Kogla and killed something with toughness 4 or less, and I've had my fair share of times playing this deck where Affectionate Indrik can effectively kill threats, and sometimes far more important threats than I would initially realize. This does kill really important creatures in the format, like Captain Sisay, which is a 4-mana 2/2 that essentially ends the game if it survives a turn. And Affectionate Indrik stops that from happening and also leaves behind a 4/4 that can continue to attack into the late game. One other through line of this deck that I don't think I'd be using if I wasn't playing in a budget style is Mutate, because a lot of the creatures with Mutate seem inconsequential at first glance, but when combined together and when under this budget constraint to make a deck, Mutate does a lot of work to synergize your creatures with themselves. So if I'm playing things like Boneyard Lurker, a 4-mana 4/4 that can mutate for 4, and when it mutates, you return a target permanent from your graveyard to your hand, and you mutate that onto another creature that has a trigger upon creatures mutating, like Dirge Bat, a 4-mana 3/3 flash flying bat with mutate for 6, and when it mutates, it destroys a creature or planeswalker that an opponent controls. Cards like Dirge Bat are cards that I wouldn't really consider and wouldn't give a second thought to, but now that I've built this deck, I'm thinking about putting Dirge Bat into a lot more decks.
100%. I've been adding Dirgebat to a lot more decks recently just because it's not an ETB trigger, which a lot of people have started hating out because they're worried about cards like Ravenous Chupacabra, a 4-mana 2/2 that kills a creature when it enters, and cards like Affectionate Indrik, which was mentioned earlier, which fights on Enter the Battlefield. So a lot of people are attacking that, but there's not a lot of effective ways to attack a flash way to mutate onto your creature the keyword flying, which is already a great upside. Giving a creature that normally doesn't have flying is very good. That is a very good effect. And then also on top of that, getting to kill a creature or a planeswalker, which is a ridiculous effect, even for the mana cost. And at worst, it's a 4-mana 3/3 with flash. I'm in. I was not in on this card before, but this card has just been insane every time I've drawn it. I've been wanting to see it in more games, and it's just like, this card's great.
Yeah, Mutate has interesting utility within a deck like this, where you have these early creatures and early things that are kind of medium. They have like an ability or a keyword, but their stat line is not great. Mutate fixes that stat line and allows the ability or the keyword to shine a lot more. So you got some random menace creature that doesn't have enough power or toughness to attack into a board. Mutate can upgrade its stats, abilities, keywords, what have you, while keeping the reason you're playing it in your deck in the first place. When you're playing cards that aren't the best stats or otherwise, Mutate can really bring them back into the limelight and allow them to sort of transition into the late game, as long as you are willing to take the 2-for-1 risk of piling your 2 cards onto one thing.
One card that I didn't notice while deck building that isn't part of the new player experience, but is available on Arena for free via a code that's in the deck's description, is Druid of the Cow, which is a 2-mana 1/3 elf that taps for a green. It's strictly better than Woodland Mystic, and cards like that allow you to push out quick mid-range threats that are 4 mana and up that really push the game to a more aggressive side. Cards like Prized Unicorn, a 4-mana 2/2 that says all creatures able to block it do so. And that's a card that you're running in your deck, right, UFO?
Yes, indeed. I'm building a Gruel deck, so green and red, and Prize Unicorn is a pretty impressive card for what it kind of looks like on the face in this deck, where you're playing so many big things with stats. There's a lot of vanilla creatures in this list. 2-mana 2/2s are at a premium here. I run a few 4-mana 4/4s with no other text, and being able to make sure that on my Alpha Strike, only this unicorn is going to be blocked makes combat so much harder for my opponent to really navigate without spending what is often premium removal on a card that they didn't even know existed. Druid of the Cow does an amazing job at getting that out. The Gruel strategy really is almost exactly as, in my eyes, Gruel midrange is in the highest level of our format, where you're trying to use ramp spells and a little bit of early interaction to get through turns 1 through 3, and then just don't stop playing important creatures to remove from turn 4 onward. While you're going to look at the list and see a bunch of things that kind of look aggressive, they're not actually cards that are going to be aggressive in a lot of cases, where you're playing these as blockers, as things that will trade with a creature once and then die, or even chump block just to let you get to your 4/4s, your 5/5s, your Elder Gagroths, because that is how you win the game as a Gruel deck in this restriction. Every once in a while, you will find a hand that will be aggressive enough to go all in, or an opponent that is slow enough to all in with your aggressive creatures. But more often than not, they're going to be used as a defensive piece, even if they are 3/1s, which aren't inherently defensive. Something I absolutely love to point out in this list is actually Epic Proportions. a fairly innocuous enchantment that is just so expensive seeming, but it messes with combat in such an interesting way, almost to the point of being comparable to Ember Cleave in exactly this type of deck and no others.
Quoted here, UFO says Epic Proportions is second Ember Cleave. Both are 6 mana, both give flash and trample. Clearly Ember Cleave.
Speaking of Ember Cleave is one of the cards that is free as part of getting into Arena as part of that new player experience, and the card's busted.
It sure is.
Oh boy, is it busted. Play it in your red decks. Lightning, do you play Ember Cleave in your Is It control list?
No, I wish I could.
Just put an Ember Cleave on Kefnet or on
Honestly?
I mean, I've legitimately considered it, to be honest.
Yeah, so Ember Cleave and that sort of strategy is exactly what Gruel's wanting to do. And the fact that we have both Epic Proportions as a way to give trample and push damage through, or on the other end, Prized Unicorn as a way to make blocks impossible and push damage through that side strategy is really everything we're willing to do. Where Gruel is just looking for pure stats. You're getting your creatures out and you're basically attacking in almost every situation. Trades are everything you're wanting to do in this list, especially as you're not right now in the highest card quality. And then as you do get more card quality, you can be a little more defensive in your trades and in your attacks. But right now, you play things out, you force 1-for-1 trades, and then once their board is depleted and your board is depleted, you play better creatures than they do. Because you've got your Gagroth, you've got your Kogla, you've got Volcanic Dragon, which is a 6-mana 4/4 haste flyer that will come in and often mess with a Planeswalker or get some extra damage in, where this is a advantage pushing list. You want to continue to stay on the board and fight for the board, but also keep a bit of a plan back, 1 or 2 creatures that can come and rebuild after a Wrath.
So, UFO, your deck really cares about the stats of creatures and, in some cases, kind of ignores the text box on creatures. And on the flip side, Lightning, your deck does the exact opposite, and for most cases, cares more about the text box of a card than its stats.
Yeah, so for my deck, I chose Dimir, blue-black, and I took a different approach to deck building than everyone else here. I went a bit less heavy on the creatures because I was a little unimpressed with some of the creatures that blue-black offered me, and decided to go for a slightly lower creature count in favor of playing impactful cards and more non-creature spells. Instead of relying on creature density and a lot of bodies like the Gruel deck, I'm playing less creatures. You're not going to be going as wide here, but instead you're playing less bodies, but with more impactful text boxes like Sea Dasher Octopus, a 2/2 octopus for 1 blue that has mutate for 1 in a blue. It has flash, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Sea Dasher Octopus lets you gain advantage off of the creatures you're playing in ways that don't go as wide as some of the other decks, but allow you to still put pressure on your opponent.
Yeah, it definitely seems like you have taken this card pool and built the first tempo deck I really saw of the piles that came to us, where you're a much lower creature count, but you have a lot of interaction. Being blue, you have some of the few counter spells that we can play. Then you also get the premium black removal spells. Like Cruel Cut, I have been consistently impressed with. It's not amazing, but the suite of early removal often just needs to be good enough and not insanely great. Would you agree?
For sure. There's definitely a lot of top tier black removal in the new player experience. We've already mentioned Erebos' Intervention, stuff like Eliminate, Heartless Act, and even the cards like Cruel Cut, something like Drag to the Underworld. Drag to the Underworld is 2 black for an instant that destroys a creature and costs X less to cast, where X is your devotion to black. This is a card that isn't really seeing too much play. It doesn't really have a great home because there's some better options, but this will still absolutely get the job done.
Absolutely, and it's the kind of card that, in a pinch, can act as a fairly early removal spell. especially if you land one of your fairly cheap and quote-unquote innocuous threats.
Yeah, I'm just looking through this, and there's also even a similar mutate sub-theme here with, the Dirge Bat, and additionally Dreamtail Heron and Pouncing Shore Shark, which one is a mutate creature that gives a card draw on mutate, while the other is bounce on mutate. And I imagine that in some situations you'll just be able to snowball that on top of your Sea Dasher Octopus and the Dirge Bat and other potential threats that you can be mutating over to gain this incremental advantage, go a little bit taller as opposed to wide in this list.
Speaking of going tall and having that through line, I also noticed that there's a good amount of not only creatures with flying in this list, including the incredible card of Stormwing Entity, which is 3 blue for a 3/3 flying creature with prowess. When it enters the battlefield, scry 2, and it only costs 1 and a blue if you've cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn.
Also, it flies.
I said flyer.
Also, it flies.
I know you've read this card, but did you realize it has flying?
No, I actually didn't. And not only does it have these creatures with flying, it also has payoffs for those creatures with flying, like Warden of Evos Isle, which is 3 mana for a 2/2 flying bird wizard that says creature spells with flying you cast cost 1 less.
Look, you're already playing a bird wizard. You're already winning.
I don't know how your opponent wins if you land this bird wizard.
It's a bird wizard.
Is there any other more interesting... Oh, Shark Beast? Pouncing Shore Shark?
Ooh, it's a shark with hands. Don't think about it too much, but that thing has hands.
Why did you have to say that?
Then Rakshasa, the cat demon.
Got some grabbers. Yeah, we've got cat demons. We've got
Oh, wait a second. There's even more mutate. We have Archipelagor?
We have Archipelagor, baby!
the destroyer of draft, Archipelagor.
Casual 6 mana to cause your opponent to go to the Shadow Realm.
Looks like that's the end of the interesting creature types, though.
Yeah, you just want me to talk more about how Pouncing Shore Shark has hands, little grabbers. It's reaching out for you.
I can only think of Pouncing Shore Shark as either a macho man wrestler or an old grandma in shark clothing.
See, all I can see, because of how the arms are shaped, it makes me think of when something's shown with baby arms.
Oh, mm-hmm.
God, I was going to be excited about this card, but now I can never look at it again.
It kind of looks like what Smeagol would look like if it was a shark.
Smeagol Shark?
It makes the fish eating scene better. I'll take that in the Lord of the Rings rematch set. Just give us Pouncing Shore Shark, but it's Smeagol.
Just give us Smeagol, but it's Pouncing Shore Shark. You gotta establish hierarchy here.
Which came first, the Smeagol or the Shore Shark?
Anyway, why are you playing Raised Dead Lightning?
I don't know. It's...
I'm sure Raised Dead is in this list because it's a card that allows you to take some of your limited threats and allow you to spread them further.
Yeah, you're a bit low on creatures, and being able to get back one after it inevitably dies is not nothing. It probably should be a Clackbridge Troll, because I somehow missed that card twice.
Missed big clackers.
Yes, in the Go Tall strategy, you missed the tallest card you had access to.
Mm-hmm. I'm good at Magic sometimes.
I don't know if I would call that one tall. He's got a good squat going on. Have you looked at Clackbridge Troll? He's got a real good squat going on.
Well, no, that just implies that it could be taller.
Yeah.
But look at that squat.
You see, I can't, because I'm looking at Lightning's list and there's no Clackbridge Troll in it.
Oh, good call, good call.
I actually think that this was a strategic move because generally you want to mutate your creatures over other creatures, and you just can't mutate things over a Clackbridge Troll. It's too big.
Yeah, and you're giving your opponent some goats to mutate over instead.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a complete non-bow.
I was playing 5.5D chess.
Can you just imagine the image of Dovinbon throwing a goat at a Clackbridge Troll to keep it from attacking?
It's I can't make it stop! Throw the goats!
No, that isn't that just a Monty Python sketch or something?
Possibly? It's been a while.
I like where this is going. Okay, instead of clapping coconuts together to make horse noises, is it just clapping goats together?
Yeah, just take the goat hooves and clap them together instead of on the ground themselves.
So is this where you just like start questioning what a 3-goat maneuver is called?
Well, no, a 3-goat maneuver is called a clackbridge troll.
Cool little thing. We also have Massacre Worm, right? So Clackbridge Troll into Massacre Worm is Chef's Kiss.
That is the Wombo combo.
And you can curve into that.
Yes, you can.
Speaking of cards that aren't in these decks, but would absolutely be in these decks once you add some wild cards, Vivian Monsters Advocate, the important text being here the -2, which allows you to search for a creature that costs less than the card that you cast. Had a game where you cast Massacre Worm and then put Clackbridge Troll into play with that. So they get 3 goats, and then, yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Did you talk about winning games with Clackbridge Troll?
We've talked too much about clackbridge troll. I think I'm starting to become one.
Just go find a bridge in your town and guard it.
All I'm saying...
Bring me the goats!
All I'm saying is if you play this with a card that prevents creatures from having triggers when they enter the battlefield, you just get a 5-mana 8/8.
Also, notably, a lot of white decks are on Hushbringer right now, and Clackbridge Troll just gets really excited when it sees a Hushbringer.
On either side.
Speaking of cards with disturbing art, Hushbringer, it's got a giant pair of lips on it, and it's also a decent card, so you get to see it more. It's a 2-mana 1/2 with flying and lifelink. Hey, lifelink, that's fun. And it also says, creatures entering the battlefield or dying do not cause triggers to happen, or something like that. Point being is that it stops creatures from dying or from entering the battlefield properly. So that's fun. Who's your affectionate Indrik triggers?
Yeah, it kind of counters that Nkara Golgari deck.
Joker Boney, I do want you to know one thing about Hushbringer.
What?
It doesn't have one pair of lips on it.
Oh, it's got many lips.
It has 11.
The definition of ellipses.
Why did you take the time to count?
Wait, sorry, it's 12.
We have gone places today.
I need to issue an addendum.
What?
It's actually 13.
Please stop.
All right, now that we've talked a bit too much about lips, let's talk about upgrades for these decks. Because there's a lot of upgrades for these decks and a lot of different directions that these can go.
Yeah, so like you, Joker, really want a Witch of the Moors in that list, don't you?
I really do want a Witch of the Moors in this list. I also want a few more Angels. Witch of the Moors being a 5-mana 4/4 with Death Touch. Because, good stats already. It also has a lot of arms. Speaking of having too many of body parts on a card, even though it's a human warlock, it has about 4 arms. It also says, at the beginning of your end step, only your end step. I've misplayed this card in paper a few times. I'm sorry. At the beginning of your end step, if you've gained life this turn, target opponent sacrifices a creature, and you get a creature back from your graveyard to hand. This card's just very good.
I hate to be the arms police here, but Witch of the Moors has at least 9 arms.
What?
Why do you keep counting these things?
Sorry, it also does say each opponent. So, if you're in a multiplayer format, even better. It's a very good card. And if you gain even the smallest amount of life, so like we talked about in Passionate Orator earlier, if you have one creature enter the battlefield this turn, hey, that could be Witch of the Moors. Your opponent has to sacrifice a creature, and then you get to bring a creature back. You got 2 cards worth of value out of this thing already. And then if you get to untap with it again, how do they win that game? They just don't.
Now, also, did you know we have Crested Sun Bear in this format?
Yes, Crested Sun Bear was added back in Amonkhet Remastered. It's a 5-mana 5/5 horse. You just get to play a big horse, and it says other horses you control have indestructible. That's just great text already. And at the beginning of each end step, if I remember this card correctly, this one says each, if you've gained any amount of life this turn, you get a 5/5 horse. And that one's indestructible. So guess what? If they try to wrath you on their turn, you still untap with a 5/5 horse. Because you're a life gain deck. Also, if you have a way to gain life on their turn, you untap with 15 power. Because, geez, Magic the Gathering. And this isn't even talking about cards for the most recent set, Kaldheim. Another ridiculous card you get to add when you start upgrading this deck, Righteous Valkyrie, a 3-mana 2/4 with flyer that says whenever another angel or cleric enters the battlefield under your control, gain life equal to that creature's toughness. And then also says, as long as you have 7 life more than your starting life total, creatures you control have +2/+2. Now, if you thought it was easy to gain life with the starter deck, imagine how much easier it becomes to gain life when you get to add Soul Sister to your deck, or when you just get to add basic statted flyers or normal creatures with lifelink. It is so easy to have 7 more life than your life total. And this card's just insane, because it's already hard to remove with red removal. When it's a 4/6, it's even better. And that's right, it doesn't say other creatures you control.
It is very good. I can give you that much, especially in that Angel Tribal deck you were talking about earlier, where you have even more angels, and the angel theme in Kaldheim seems to fit almost perfectly into what we got here. We got quite a few lifelink angels. We already have a bunch of lifelink angels, and many things that give your angels, which again already are good creatures, even more value.
We also notably got some cheaper angels so that the deck isn't necessarily a tribal deck that starts on turn 4 or 5.
Hey, Dragons is a perfectly playable deck.
But that sort of stompy mentality also translates to Gruel, where you have, just a little bit better ramp than what you see in the current list, but the same type of plan where you want to be playing a little bit of interaction on 1 and 2, or ramp on 1 and 2 into a little later in the game, casting your 4 drops ahead of curve, your 5 drops ahead of curve, and your few 6 drops ahead of curve. You bring the curve down a little bit in the upgraded versions of Gruel, but you bring it down because you don't need 6 drops when you have 5 drops as powerful as Battle Mammoth and Vivian Monster's Advocate, 4 drops as powerful as Gem Razor or Questing Beast.
You mentioned it. You have to read what it says.
Fine.
Read the card. Read the card.
Read the card.
I will only read what it says if this entire segment gets in.
The pact is sealed.
Questing Beast is 2 and 2 green for a legendary creature type beast. 1 second. Let's actually
You have to pull up the card. There's no other way to do it.
Yes, that is exactly what I just did.
Does it? All right. But does it have reach or does it have trample?
I'm going to read out Questing Beast now. Questing Beast is 2 and 2 green for a legendary creature beast with vigilance, death touch, and haste. Questing Beast cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control can...
From the top.
We're retaking it. Questing Beast is 2 and 2 green for a 4/4 legendary creature beast. Vigilance, death touch, and haste. Questing Beast can... We're retaking it.
30 minutes later.
Yep.
It is the perfect warm-up exercise, I'm telling you.
Yeah, no, this is actually very good. We're going to need to use this.
Questing Beast is 2 and 2 green for a 4/4 legendary creature beast. It has vigilance, death touch, and haste. As well as Questing Beast cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control cannot be prevented. And whenever Questing Beast... We're retaking it.
Oh no.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. This is great for my mood, by the way, please.
This is going to need to be a recurring thing. This is great.
I really hope this whole bit stays in the final cut.
Questing Beast is 2 and 2 green for a 4/4 legendary creature beast. It has vigilance, death touch, and haste. Questing Beast cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. And combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control cannot be prevented. And whenever Questing Beast deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to target planeswalker that player controls.
We got there.
Only like 4 takes, so that was good for a first time.
Cards like that Questing Beast are amazing upgrades because they bring the same power as a card that should be more mana, but for some reason cost 4. And that advantage means that not only does your mana ramp give you better things earlier, it also means you need less of it. So being able to play the most powerful 4s and the most powerful 5s means you play less 6s. So you can go into this more early stompy list that wants to get out 1 to 2 4-drops to push the mid game into 5-drops, as opposed to trying to do that a few turns later in curving your 5s into 6s into winning the game that way. That is where Gruel wants to go.
On the other hand, you might want to lean more into those high power 6-drops if you're playing a deck that wants to ramp more, like a Golgari deck or mono green. Playing cards like Vorinclex, Monstrous Raider, a 6-mana legendary 6/6 with trample and haste that doubles the counters that you put onto things and halves the counters that your opponents put onto things, means that you can effectively close out the game with high power, high impact plays.
Hey, wait a second. It has counters that your opponent puts. Is that rounded up or rounded down?
That is rounded down. So if you're putting 1 counter onto something, you get 2, but if your opponent is putting a counter onto something, they put none.
So, would that happen to apply for sagas?
It does. It means that sagas that enter the battlefield or are around after Vorinclex hits the battlefield usually will not tick up for the rest of the game.
Would that also mean that planeswalkers that are on the battlefield that only have +1s can no longer get counters?
Yep. If you have a planeswalker like Vivian Monster's Advocate, which is a 5-mana planeswalker with 3 loyalty, a +1, and a -2, it'll enter the battlefield with 1 loyalty counter. Its +1 will put 0 loyalty counters on it, and it'll never be able to use its -2.
Also notably, the abilities on the creatures Vivian makes are via ability counters, which means it's just vanilla 3/3s and no reach.
Indeed.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for Yes. So what you're saying is that this is a very good card.
It is.
It's a very good Vivian counter, especially. Vorinclex is one of the few 6s you play because from 6 you can go -2 a Vivian, Vorinclex, Terror of the Peaks, kill a thing, attack, and you've won that game.
Absolutely.
Seems good.
I'm sure there's other things you can do with Golgari if you wanted to be not Gruel.
Oh, I mean, you know what else you could do with Golgari involving Vorinclex? What if we play another 6-drop? What if we play a 6-drop Planeswalker? What if their name was Liliana Dreadhorde General?
It turns out that combo will usually lead to the game ending because Liliana Dreadhorde General is 6 mana for a planeswalker that has some other text on it, like whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card, and +1 to make a creature, a 2/2, that will sometimes die and draw you cards. Also, it can -4 to make everyone sack 2 creatures. It starts at 6 loyalty, which is really important because when you double 6, that comes out to 12. 12, as it turns out, is a little bit more than 9, which is its cost for ultimate, which makes each opponent choose a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifice the rest.
It's a lot of words for win the game.
It is. It essentially means that your opponent will be left with usually 1 creature, 1 land, and maybe 1 or 2 other permanents that happen to be other types.
What's some upgrades that you'd want in your list, Lightning?
Yeah, so I built this list as a beginning for potentially building blue-black tempo. And I don't think blue-black is the most explored of the color pairs for playing tempo. I know the current top tempo pilots are on blue-green and a little of blue-red, but blue-black gets to play, in my opinion, still some of the best interaction you have. And also cards like Thief of Sanity that just win the game if they don't get killed immediately. Thief of Sanity is 1 blue-black for a 2/2 flyer that reads, whenever Thief of Sanity deals combat damage to a player, you look at the top 3 cards of their library, exile 1 of them face down, and then put the rest in their graveyard. So you're just taking 3 cards from them. 1 of those cards you exile, and you may look at and cast that card for as long as it remains exiled. Notably, Thief of Sanity does not have to stay in play. As soon as you hit with this card, you get to keep 1 of their cards forever, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. this card runs away with games. We mentioned Sea Dasher Octopus as a way to get advantage off hitting your opponent. Thief of Sanity does that, but with your opponent's own cards, and you get a bit of card selection.
Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself.
It feels really good as a blue-black deck to play Elder Gargaroth.
I was just going to say that.
I want to know a quick bit of wisdom.
Yeah.
UFO and or Joker Boney, you two are the ones who play Cowtech the most.
All right.
Has anyone ever taken a Bells and Lock from you?
Yes, and I won that game.
Same exact sentence.
Love it.
They cast the
Of course.
Gonti. You play a few other combos to get around that. In this case, my opponent cast the Gonti, they cast the Bells and Walk. They exiled like 3 lands and drew a card that didn't matter. And then I got to kill it, then bring it back that turn. And kill them that turn. And it was like, because I was off double black, I was off triple black, so I couldn't actually get like a Bells and Walk into my graveyard and cast it, so that just like made it even better. Because I no longer had to like put it into my graveyard myself, they did it for me.
Now, I know we just talked about a lot of decks that make no sense to any of you.
Let's cut that bit.
No, we're keeping this bit in. Believe me when I say they all are names that refer to actual combo decks in the format, and they all are names that we'll talk about later on in this podcast. Don't you worry.
Yeah, if you're excited by these decks to explore some sillier decks, don't worry. It's gonna get a bit unhinged after like episode 3.
Get unhinged? Have you heard the number of times we've listed cards with too many body parts?
Speaking of unhinged, let's go to Seismic to talk about last week's puzzle.
Last week, we had Oddity Odyssey answer our puzzle first with this comment. Play the Forest. Swing with everything but the Naga Vitalist. Their best blocks are blocking Kenrith and Leaf Gilder, as all of the others either have trample or less power, which leaves 9 damage unblocked. Use the Naga Vitalist and the Forest to add green, then tap 2 other lands for Castle Garenbrig. This leaves you with a land and a Mox untapped. Use the 6 mana from Castle Garenbrig, as it can be used for creature abilities, in conjunction with the 2 untapped sources, to activate Kenrith 4 times, making the damage 13 exactly.
Congratulations, Oddity Odyssey, for finding the solution to the puzzle first. And congratulations to everyone else that found a solution. Now let's go to UFO for this week's puzzle.
So this week's puzzle has a name, and I lovingly call it Fall of the Valkyries.
Man, you're such a nerd.
Ain't it great, though?
Oh, it's a good name. I'm not complaining.
So, in this puzzle, I pit you against a Bane Slayer Angel. Mono Red's kind of Bane, and ask you to win the game through all attacks with nothing left for chance. So no card draw if you can find a way to do so, and no random effects if you can find a way to do so. From here, there are a lot of different paths to victory, but only one, I think, that will get you to exactly the number you need to hit. I wish you all luck in solving.
Get out there, solvers!
And leave your comments for that hashtag engagement.
Engagement.
Thank you, UFO, for that puzzle. But now it's time for us to end this episode. It's been me, Joker Boney.
And UFO.
I've been Seismic Lawns.
And this has been Blightning.
And if you made it this far in the podcast, it is important to let you know that we have set up a Patreon, which you may be interested in adding some support to.
Yeah, make sure to check down below for links to both our Patreon
and everyone else's socials, Twitch links.
Yeah, and where you can find us when we aren't on this podcast, trapped inside your YouTube screen. Please let us out. It's cold.
As well as the deck lists for the free-to-play decks that we've made.
Also, you can find the entirety of Questing Beasts text in the comments.
not the description, in the comments.
In the comments.
Yes.
Well, I mean, we're all going to add it now.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you
Bye,
all for,
everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for watching and
Bye.
have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Please free us.
Please.
Oh. Y'all are amazing.
All right,
Okay.
I'm gonna stop the recording so I can.